Hello, welcome back. I'm Sean, and this is the Mountains Garage YouTube channel. This video will be part 2 of assembling a fast street car / race car Powerglide for my 64 Dodge Dart GT LS single turbo low buck project. It's part 2 of assembly, but there were a few videos leading up to it where I stripped the transmissions that I had, did some case comparisons, so go back and catch up. Most of you probably saw it. I don't know. In yesterday's video, I did put a new case bushing in, and I used the current drivers that I have. I have many sizes, and it's usually not a problem to swap out a bushing. Thursday, I was shopping online. I was on the TSR website. TSR may sound familiar. They produced, and still do, one of probably 2 books on the Powerglide that even exist. I know JW Products made one, and Carl Monroe from TSR did. This is the next state over in New Hampshire. This cover car I remember watching run at my local track, which is also featured on the cover, New England Dragway. I believe Carl has passed on, but I think his grandson Will is still on the forums answering questions and representing TSR. I don't know them, I don't speak to them, but I will do business with them again. Because this is Saturday morning and I already got my stuff. I ordered it Thursday after lunch. It's only the next state over, but they did not waste any time getting me my stuff, and that always makes me happy. In my box of happiness that showed up this morning is this cool little round aluminum tool. It was $23.94 on the TSR website. Its main purpose is to push the stator tube out of the front pump. And when I do the front pump, we'll do that. But they went ahead and cut a few more diameters on it, and it'll service the small bushings in a Powerglide. I love stuff like that, and that is reasonably priced if you ask me. So, shout out to them. Let's continue on our project. I don't typically buy a standard rebuild kit when I'm building something custom because I'm going to need extra clutches and steels of different dimensions. Laid out in front of me today is my hodgepodge of stuff that I have. I have 5 red Altos. I'm not sure I'm a fan or not, but I have 5 of them and I'm not afraid to use them. The stock stack up had 5 clutches, 5 steels, a wave plate, and the stock pressure plate. Some kits will give you more. Here's an example. This is a ATP Pioneer. It has 6 reverse clutches. That may come in handy, so I don't know what I'm going to use today until I get measuring. In all performance Powerglides, you're going to get rid of the wave plate in both the reverse and the high clutches. So that frees up some space. Way back, a long time ago, when I built Powerglides, there weren't that many parts available. You did put a clutch hub in the high clutch drum because they're super weak. You could probably get away with the stock input most of the time because nobody's making that much power or going that fast. As power levels went up, Powerglide parts became more popular and stronger. Nowadays you can build a super strong one. If you watch the popularity, they skyrocketed in the 80s and 90s and kind of turned the corner and are dropping in popularity because of the power levels that are available now if you have the money. Even if you don't. You can easily shadow one of these with some Chinese turbos and a junkyard engine. So we're going to do our best to build a modern day Powerglide, and one of those upgrades is the stock reverse pressure plate that's lugged into the case is cast, and they will crack for relatively cheap money. I'll look up the price in a minute to tell you, but this is a steel one. Much stronger, direct replacement, easy. I have all stock dimension steels that I'm going to run in the reverse and the high clutch drum. I don't believe in thin steels in this application because they're not that thick to start with and they're not very wide. And in the high clutch drum, they're really small. I don't mind running thinner clutches if I need it for clearance, but the steels are going to take a lot of heat. I try to stick with stock dimension stuff. I did, however, while I was on the TSR site, buy one thinner steel if I got in a situation. I was trying to think ahead. where I needed just to gain a little bit of clearance. So I do have one thin, everything else is thick. In your trans brake valve body kit, they're going to give you a amount of reverse clutch return springs. My kit came with 8. The instructions say install a full set. So I called them, and they want you to put one of these in every other, and it works out. There's 17 holes, so every other you can put 8 and put stock ones in between. The instructions never said this, so that's twice. I'm going to get to the valve body I bought. I wish I'd bought a different one. I should have bought a TSR. I would have had it in 2 days. But the night I went to buy it, I don't know if I already mentioned this, there were none available. Everywhere I went, wouldn't be restocked till New Year's. So I'll get to the brand I bought and whose I think it is, because I think it's been resold. Whatever. They were kind of vague on they still are on what to do to the rear of the case of the Powerglide, but we solved that, and we'll put in one of these springs in every other. The springs are going to control how hard it hits and how fast it releases, much like the hole size we drilled. The springs are held in with a retainer plate. A heavy duty one is definitely cheap money and a good idea. The stock one is kind of flimsy. I like how this folds over. Cheap insurance. I just took a peek. The reverse pressure plate, spring retainer, and my one thin steel was $70. So, good insurance. Nowadays, it doesn't buy you much. Sometimes it'll hardly get you dinner. I've set the reverse piston down in the case, and if you look, there's quite a difference between the height of the piston and where the case lug is, where the first steel would sit against the piston. There's quite a bit to machine off there. I haven't measured it yet, but it's substantial, so I can take off quite a bit. I will measure that with a depth mic to get a good idea. I'm fortunate to have the original stack to compare height with. Good place to start to see how many clutches and steels I can fit in there. As far as clutch pack clearance in the reverse in a fast street car race Powerglide, 7 to 10 thousandths of clutch. Probably airing to the loose side, which is something I don't normally do, but frictional losses in a Powerglide, especially in the high clutch drum, I don't want to jump ahead, but setting up the reverse, let's shoot for, depending on how many clutches, 60 to 75 thousandths. Making some quick progress. I think I mentioned the piston's just sitting in there with no seals because obviously I'm going to take it in and out to machine it, potentially. The steels on the reverse clutch pack and the Powerglide have a mark on one of the lugs, and that sits in this case lug, the bottom of the case, and it has to face on the right side. They only fit one way. I stacked up the red Altos first. I only had 5, and it didn't take up enough space. So I busted out these green clutches with the standard steels and standard dimension clutches. I am actually at the shelf right here where the pressure plate's going to sit. So I essentially have no clutch pack clearance, but I can easily machine that out of the piston. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to cut 70 thousandths off the piston. We should be good to go. Way back, they used to help you out. When they built something, they thought ahead. When it's fully assembled, you have this window where you can actually measure the actual clutch pack clearance. And we'll also pressure test it when we get there. So, one thing at a time, I'm going to cut the piston. The original piston was 890 thousandths. I just cut it to 830 thousandths. Conservative Sean says, start at 60 thousandths and check it out. What a mess, huh? It's kind of fun, satisfying, goes quick. I had to spend a little time with a Rolock disc polishing my new pressure plate because it was really tight between the big lugs. The small lugs were fine, but where it ran in between, I would have to hammer it in and out. So I polished it up so I can pull it in and out easily. And everything's just sitting back in the case still without any seals. Clutches are still dry, and I got a loose 68 thousandths. I could probably jam in a 70. I'm going to call it good. The reverse clutches will operate anywhere from 50 to 120 thousandths. There's a lot of travel in the piston. I don't want drag, but I don't want to start too loose, so I'm going to call this good. I always add to the slightly tighter side, knowing it's going to break in some, so I think this will be perfect. If you get out, upwards toward the 120 thousandths, it's very possible when you put the brake on, it may still lurch forward. Comparing my clutch pack stacks, my new one is only slightly higher than my 50-something-year-old clutches that I removed. Another good sign you're in the ballpark. The reverse clutch pack snap ring is kind of unique, the way the ends are slotted. This end has to go in the case first, and this needs to go in last, and when you're removing it, this one needs to come out first, and this one needs to come out last, the exact opposite. Otherwise they interfere, but in the case they kind of keep each other in check, if you will. The piston seals are straight cut. They're just quad rings, round. The case itself is tapered here and here for the middle. So if you lube everything up, you can push it in by hand. Worst case, maybe tap it with your plastic hammer, but unless you really lose your mind, you shouldn't hurt the seals. The spring tools, for years, this one is all I had for all my transmissions. This pops into the snap ring groove, and this goes up and down a mile. Sometimes with heavy springs, it would surprise you by releasing. It was a gift from my buddy who was a KD Tools salesman. Say that 10 times. KD Tools salesman. He's no longer with us. Super nice guy, but he gave me this for working on his car. And it's all I had. I've had some decent success with this. This is a cheap eBay rig, but it goes down through the case. You install this stuff afterwards. Sitting where it is right now on these forks, it actually locks the whole case down. Pretty rigid. It works pretty slick. You just tighten the nut. This looks very similar to a TH350 and 700 R4 spring removal tool down inside the case, but this is Powerglide specific because it's wider. It lugs into the snap ring groove. Also does a great job. So choose your weapon. 8 of these springs are going to be heavier than stock. So be prepared for any surprises. Let me jam it together. Earlier in the video, I think I mentioned that the trans brake valve body kit came with only 8 springs. And it takes 17 total. That doesn't work out as every other. Would it work that way with a weird spacing? Probably. I couldn't let that slide. My world would probably fall off its axis. I didn't know I had this condition until I started talking about it in videos. Everything has to be even and balanced and seem correct, or I kind of stall out. So, fortunately, I had a complete set of 17, and that's what I installed. I lubed up my clutches, assembled everything. I put the brake in the snap ring down at 6 o'clock between the big lugs. Seemed logical. There's no guidance as to where to put it. I just wouldn't leave it in a small opening. Many will argue either way. It's actually the way I found all 3 that I took apart, so it'll be fine. Now to air test it, you need to either blow up through this hole and plug the back hole that we haven't done anything with yet. If you remember, we drilled through. It was already drilled through, and I actually continued through and made a new reverse apply hole similar to a non-rear pump case. Or, to air check it, you could put your thumb over this and blow in the back hole, and that's going to apply the piston. But the other day, after I tried to saw my hand off, my thumb, I was giving myself some retail therapy on the TSR transmission website. was this rig. It's just a piece of flat aluminum bar, 5 holes. It's all tapped 1/8-inch pipe for the fitting. It actually came with a shop air fitting, wrong style that I use, but this whole rig was $17.34. So I couldn't resist because I love tools. Hell, just the chuck piece, probably a couple bucks. So let's bolt this on and give it a shot. And yes, the 17 springs that I did have are the heavy duty trans brake springs that I saved, and believe it or not, knew where they were. The air test plate didn't come with the 5/16 Allen heads. I had bought 100 of them for a project I needed 13 for. A Turbo 400 fabricated aluminum pan. Cheaper by the 100. So the hole I talked about, is this one. It was already existing in this case. This was a rear pump Powerglide, so reverse supply was up here. This hole was started through and gets blocked by the plate and gasket or your governor support, billet support, shorty support, whatever you put on. This hole will end up getting plugged. For today, I'm just going to put my finger over it and blow air in here. I could do it. It doesn't matter which way you do it, but I'll blow air in here. You could put a 1/4 turn valve if you wanted to check it. You could hook it up to direct low air pressure, whatever you want to do. I'll set the camera up and we'll watch it go in and out. Hopefully don't squirt oil all over the camera. All right, take cover. That first time it escaped past my glove, I wasn't pushing hard enough. But the important thing is, you don't hear air escaping other than beyond my finger. So that's functioning. That's all there is to the air test. It's kind of anticlimactic unless there's something wrong. It sure is easier than pulling it back out and doing it again. Now, if I had my new gear set, now is when I would put it in the case. But it would just sit there while I still have to rebuild the high clutch drum and the front pump. So technically I'm not being held up yet, and I have a really good feeling that Monday, maybe Tuesday, it'll show up. The power of positive thinking. Shooting this video on the Powerglide feels good. It reminds me of my very early days of transmission rebuilding. I remember doing my first Powerglide for my Chevelle. I had broken every 4-speed that I had and decided to cross over. And just building it yourself and putting it in the car and having it work for years. It's just a good feeling. You know, there's always a joke that mechanics don't work on their own cars. That's not true in my world. I prefer to work on mine and I don't want to work on anybody else's. I wish I could have made a career out of that, but you can't. But you know what I mean. I enjoy the fruits of my labor. So someday I'll get to feel this one. They all have their own personality. It's just cool. So next is the high clutch drum. Very similar to what we did today. I ended up putting 6 in here. A lot of people, you take the wave plate out. I had 5 clutches to start with. You take the wave plate out. A lot of people will double up a steel. That doesn't make any sense to me. I guess it would have less rotating friction, but I'm going to go with the extra clutch every time. Same story with the high clutch drum. I bought, well, I guess we'll cover that in the next video. So, again, like, share, subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon, day or so.